Hi, welcome back to the review of Act 1 of Arthur Miller's The Crucible. We're going to dive right back in where the last video left off, so about halfway through the act. Now we have John Proctor and Abigail are about to have a little moment alone together. Here's the video. Thanks. Hello students, it's Mr. Maines. I'm here to bring you another English content video. Hope you're ready to sit back and enjoy. All right, here we go with scene 1D. So if Abigail Williams, a pretty 17-year-old girl, left alone with John Proctor, a farmer in his middle 30s. These two have an offstage past that is brought to light as the two converse in the attic of Paris's home. As John enters the stage, Mary Warren, who works in the Proctor home, quickly tells him that she was just leaving. Mercy Lewis, it is said, is equal parts afraid of him and attracted to him. She also sees herself out rapidly to return to watching over Ruth Putnam. The dialogue between these two is fantastic and often analyzed. However, for this video, I want to look at their body language and their movement as the original author intended. So let's look at the italicized stage directions to give us some insight into these two iconic characters. On stage, John has a knowing smile on his face. Abigail is seen standing on her tiptoes. She's wide-eyed and absorbing his presence. Once they are truly alone, John's smile widens. Abby laughs nervously and then confidently approaches John. The flirtation is quickly evident and should be picked up by the majority of the audience immediately. As she approaches him, John seems to reconsider and takes a step towards the exit. Abigail looks feverishly into his eyes and stands directly in his path to keep him in the room. His smile vanishes as he physically moves her out of the way. She grasps his hand in a last-ditch effort to win him over. By her own words and actions, Abigail has gone just a bit too far. John calls her child, transforming Abigail's love into anger. Again, John gets physical. He gently pushes her from him, even shakes her. John's demands are now direct and to the point. He says, "We never touched Abby." Abigail is dumbfounded. She can't believe the words even as they're being spoken. Betty, it seems, has heard enough. She screams out as the chorus downstairs sings, "Going Up to Jesus." Before long, Reverend Paris, the Putnams, Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey all make their way upstairs to investigate the young girl's screams. The conflict between Abigail and Proctor would have to wait to be resolved. Let's look at some of their biggest quotes from this little section here. Abigail, in tears, says, "I look for John Proctor that took me from my sleep and put knowledge in my heart. You loved me, and whatever sin it is, you love me yet." Abigail, her whole quest here is to essentially replace Mrs. Proctor, to be with the man who kind of showed her into what she thinks is adulthood, what she thinks is the real world. She says that she feels like Salem is a pretense, like there's this cloud hanging over this town and reality is hidden from them. She thinks John has showed her this reality. That now the scales have been removed from her eyes and she can really see things for what they are. John, though, is not willing to go there with Abby. His big quote from here is, "Abby, I may think of you softly from time to time, but I'll cut off my hand before I'll ever reach for you again. We never touched, Abby." This kind of sentiment straight out of the New Testament here of cutting off an arm that causes you to sin for John Proctor. Clearly, he's probably not being literal, but I think this hyperbole speaks to his character drive, that he refuses to be with Abby again because he wants to rebuild his marriage with Elizabeth Proctor. So now we're going to be moving into the next subscene. In between the conversation between Abigail and Proctor and when Hale actually arrives, there is a little subscene that we'll talk a little bit about, but let's get to talking about Hale as well. So talk of witchcraft ceases for a little while after Rebecca Nurse calms young Betty back to sleep, just with her gentle presence alone. The big names of the town quickly resort to bickering amongst themselves. Giles Corey and Paris argue over Paris's salary. Mr. Putnam has a land dispute with Proctor and Giles. Among this chaos, Reverend John Hale enters the room. Hale is pitched as an expert in the invisible world of demons, devils, and witches. He brings with him the authority of his education and with the experience of investigating a woman who is accused of being a witch. Under Hale's investigation, the woman was proven not to be a witch. That event likely led Paris wanting Hale and Salem to disprove the claims of witchcraft in his town to maintain the status quo. The narration that precedes Hale's arrival clues us in to Hale's purpose in the play. Hale is a true believer in the invisible world of spirits, demons, and devils. Arthur Miller tells us that the world still divides morality into absolute goods and evils. He argues that science and history have proven the world to be much more relative than the Christian worldview permits. Miller argues that political policy or the laws of the land should not just be equated with moral right, nor should opposition to a given law be seen as diabolically malevolent. Hale, in short, begins his role in the play as only seeing the world in black and white. His growth can only be measured if he can begin to see shades of gray in an ever complex world. For the time being, however, Hale does his job. He questions, he examines, he seeks judgment. Of course, he brought his lovely books. He says they're weighted with authority, and the crowd goes wild. Just a great line. He is truly a true believer, as we said. Let's move to the last sub-scene of our play, and that's the interrogation of Abigail and Tituba. Hale's initial inquiries lead to him learning about the dancing in the woods. He immediately goes to scold Paris, but Salem's Reverend tells Hale that it was done in secret. As Hale is caught up on the supernatural claims of Tituba's abilities and Ruth Putnam being sent to conjure the spirits of her dead sisters, Hale begins reading through his books. He's on the case and will see this through. He then does his best to rouse Betty from her slumber. Nothing seems to be working, so he presses Abigail about the dancing and what living things they may have been boiling in their soup. Abigail, feeling the pressure of suspicion from Hale, Paris, and the rest, says that it was Tituba who called the devil. Moments later, Tituba is brought into the room. Abby wastes no time. She makes me drink blood, she cries. Hale begins his questioning of Tituba. She immediately denies any wrongdoing. Abigail doubles down, shouting out, "She sends her spirit on me in church. She comes to me every night to go and drink blood. She comes to me while I sleep, always making me dream corruptions." Paris has heard enough. He bids Tituba to confess herself, or else he will whip her to death. Putnam calls for her hanging. Tituba falls to her knees and confesses. The following scene is hard to look away from. Hale holds so much power in the room. He's clearly in charge, but he's missing so much information about the interpersonal dynamics of the people in Salem. Paris has ceded much of his religious authority to Hale in this moment, but is still the owner of Tituba and the guardian of Abigail. The Putnams are some of the richest people in Massachusetts, and they have several old scores to settle. Mrs. Putnam had been the one to bring Tituba into the room. Had she prepped her for what was to come? Mr. Putnam now feeds two names into the chaos. Did you ever see Sarah Good with the devil, or Osborne? Paris and Hale are double teaming Tituba. Finally, she breaks from her half-hearted comments. She stands and in a fury tells Paris the devil often asks her to kill him. Paris is shocked. Tituba, like Abigail had done earlier, seizes power right out of the air. They want her to play the villain? Fine, she can play. She gets a sweet cathartic release by fantasizing about the death of her master and being brought back to Barbados with a nice, pretty dress to wear. Paris doesn't say another word until Betty wakes up. Tituba gives the Putnams what they want. She accuses Goody Good and Goody Osborne of belonging to the devil, the women who Mrs. Putnam believes had something to do with the death of her babies. Abigail, having watched Tituba's moment in the sun, becomes enraptured herself. She confirms the two names that Tituba had given and adds one more, Bridget Bishop. Betty awakes and gives two more names at first. Then she and Abigail shout out an additional 6, for a total of 11 names by the end of the first act. Hale's adrenaline is surely at an all-time high. He hears Putnam calling for the marshal. He shouts out to have the marshal bring chains. He's prepared his whole life for this. He would not disappoint his calling. And that is the end of Act 1. It was all in one scene in that play itself, all in the upstairs room in Paris's home. Now we'll see where the next act takes us. Thanks for watching.